Hey everybody, it's Dan. Welcome back and welcome to another miniature manufacturer scale comparison video. And you might be wondering, Dan, didn't you just do this video like a month and a half ago? And you'd be correct, because I did. However, right after I put that video out, I was reached out to by a subscriber who said that they wanted to send me a portion of their collection to press into this miniature scale collection that I've been accumulating over the years. And yes, they very generously sent me this grouping of miniatures that filled some of the gaps that were in this collection. And so I thought to express that gratitude, I would redo this video because I now have like 33% more miniatures in it that I wanted to show to you guys so you had the information too. And as I was thinking about putting this video together, I realized that I should probably make this like an annual thing. Like I'm going to call this probably the 2025 guide. But next summer, end of next summer, I'll do the same thing as the 2026 guide because I'm certainly going to have a lot more miniatures than I do now. Hopefully from some different manufacturers or ranges. And so for some of those miniatures, I'll just do what I did here, which is throw them on round bases, prime them white, and then write down the name of the manufacturer or the range. You'll see that too in editing. I'll add it down at the bottom that there's in the subtitles I'll have a listing of whatever's on the bases because sometimes it's long enough that it wraps around the base and it's not immediately clear what it's for. But yeah, so this is probably familiar to those that watched the last scale comparison guide, but I did switch the format a little bit because I do want to standardize this to keep it consistent between what will again be like annual editions. So there's still the same scale guide on the left, which is listed in millimeters. And I did in that last video, I proved that by like holding up next to a tape measure and some other, I think bases for scale, just to prove that like I'm not way off. But what I also did here is instead of having just single miniatures, I think I did like still frames if I remember right from an editing standpoint. I'm doing groupings of 3 miniatures here because I realized that it conveys pretty much the same information. Like you can still see the height of these miniatures based on the scale chart on the left, but by doing in groupings of 3 like this, it also allows some side-by-side comparisons. And my thought was that, for example, next year, like in the 2026 guide, not only will I have more miniatures that I will have, accumulated between now and then, but I can also mix up the order of the miniatures. Like this is the order for the 2025 guide, but if I then, mix and match the existing miniatures that we have, it almost becomes like completely new information to a certain extent. So that's what I'll do. I'll pay attention to the order I did in this one, and then for the 2026 guide and then 2027 guide, I'll be sure to mix and match so that there's no duplication of information, or minimal duplication of information, I should say. You'll note too there are some duplicates, like there's I think 4 miniatures now from the Lord of the Rings line, but I thought it was relevant because most of them are different species like elves, goblins, humans. I also have different ranges from manufacturers, like Fireforge is a big one, where their historical range is substantially smaller than their fantasy range. But I would even like to start doing that for companies where there isn't really a discrepancy, like Mantic, their Kings of War line versus their sci-fi range. I'm starting to do that with Games Workshop because with both 40K and fantasy, there was a really substantial scale creep over the years. So I'm trying to hit every edition best as I can. But even here, you'll see I have like a 3rd edition Necron versus a 10th edition Necron. So I think it's funny as I'm like starting to map this out. You can see I can get really out of hand really quickly if you're trying to hit everything. And frankly, I am. So we'll see how this can grow over the years. But yeah, as I said, for the most part, I'm trying to pick like one miniature from every range, and best as I can. Certainly, if with like historicals, I'm trying to pick like human miniatures instead of like an animal or something like that. But the other thing to pay attention to, I don't know if I mentioned, is that some of these miniatures have splash or puddle bases that I just glued directly down on top of the round bases. And there's like a Hero Quest one now which has its own integrated base that's even thicker than a regular puddle base, and that's just something to pay attention to. I've made the conscious decision not to cut anything off of the puddle bases because that's how they come from the manufacturers, with a puddle base of some kind. So you can certainly cut it off if you'd like to, but it's really important that you pay attention to that when you're looking at height, because it does add a couple of millimeters to the height of these miniatures. So, but otherwise, you can see some of them don't, some of them do. It's just something to be aware of. And there you have it. You might have picked up on the fact that I had it roughly grouped by categories. So there's like historicals were first, then fantasy, and then sci-fi is the rough grouping. But as I said, I'll also have down in the subtitles the manufacturers or ranges that they came from. And yeah, this is, I mean, easy enough for me to throw this content together because I'm just taking stuff out of my uh, display case and throwing them onto the Lazy Susan here. So no issue for me to throw this together. So as I said, I'm going to make this now an annual thing. So this is the 2025 guide. 2026 will have all of these miniatures plus whatever I can accumulate over the next year. And then, as I said, I'm going to mix and match the groupings to provide slightly different information. Huge thanks once again to the subscriber who sent these my way. They specifically requested it. They didn't want to be named, and I completely understand that. But again, I wanted to express my gratitude that I'm really pleased to have this in this collection so that I can get this information out to the community. So appreciate you all for dropping by for this one. Plenty of review content to come, and as I said, we'll have another version of this video 1 year from now. So I'll look forward to that. I'll see you then, hopefully. But in the meantime, happy gaming.